Okay, so please join me in welcoming Barbara Bosworth. So we're here to talk about Barbara's. I think it should be on. I think it should be good to go. We're here to talk about Barbara's new book, The Sea, published by Radius Books. So before we begin talking about the project itself, a brief introduction. Barbara was born in Cleveland, Ohio. So an American photographer. And got her MFA from the Rochester Institute of Technology, and shortly afterwards began teaching at the Massachusetts College of Art, where you still continue to teach today.
Officially retired, but was there a long time.
Right. Barbara is known primarily for her large format 8x10 view camera work that deals with the landscape and the kind of intersection between the landscape and us humans and the role that we have in that landscape. And so we're here to speak about your latest book, which deals with some of those themes, The Sea. And to begin our conversation. It's a very straightforward title. I've spoken to a few photographers today. I'm thinking also of Judy Black, who made a book, based on the road trip, which is a quintessential kind of photographic theme. And the sea is also one of those, I think, quintessential subjects in photography, that goes back to the very beginning of photography. So I'm curious to know just when you began to photograph the sea and how these photographs started to become a book eventually.
So thank you for including me in this, and thank you all for coming. And I want to say it was a really hard act to follow Rob's work. That was really strong and important work. The sea has sort of always been in me, I think, as a lot of people. I grew up on one of the Great Lakes, which is a large body of water, and then when I moved to Boston, I started photographing the sea. And then at one point I started teaching a class at Mass Art called Lyric Arts of the Sea, because there's so much, the sea has been inspirational to so many artists over a long time. So painting and poets and writers. So I did a course that was built around the idea of the sea. And then I felt at one point it was time to pull together my images of like 30 years of the sea. But how can you make a book about something so large topic-wise as the sea? I'm always telling my students, you can't try to write a report about the Civil War. What about the Civil War are you interested in? So for me, it was really about that experience of wandering the shoreline. The sea encompasses so much that I couldn't possibly do a book of all of that. What it means in our lives and the tragedies that happen at sea and the lives lost. But for me, it was this luxurious, I know, but this interaction and relationship of wandering the shoreline. So that's basically what the start of the book was. My wandering the shore. I'm probably it's a huge sickness, this beachcomber part of me. You can't go home without something in your pockets of collections from the sea. I love reading things about the sea. The book includes an excerpt from Virginia Woolf, one of her, where she wrote, it's the waves. The beginning of each one of her segments, she describes the light moving over the water. And it's just so exquisitely, sorry, is that better? So it's just an exquisite description of light moving on the sea. So I included some of Virginia Woolf in there. There's a beautiful piece by Barry Lopez, American writer who writes a lot about landscape, but I'd only read this one story about the sea, and it's watching a person wandering the sea, picking up shells, looking at them, putting them down again. So it felt appropriate in there. Anyway, I'm digressing. The book is a compilation of a lot of things, writing. Absolutely,
and I wanted to ask you about that, because in a sense, one might expect that, with my brief introduction of your 8x10 view camera landscape photography, a book about the sea, I think many of us might have a kind of preconception of what that might be. And what it was really interesting to me is that your book is very much not what one might expect. There are obviously many of your images, but you have interwoven so many other elements. You've already mentioned the importance of text in this book. So you have included excerpts from great writers like Virginia Woolf and Rachel Carson. Also other texts from a photographer, friend of yours, Jem Southam, who's here.
Yeah, anyway.
Hello. So, a real variety of different perspectives in written form on the sea. And the book is also even kind of structured in chapters. Oftentimes we might expect a text to kind of punctuate the end of a book, but you've sort of structured the plates in relation to these different texts. So can you talk a bit about how you started to bring these different elements together? Yeah,
because a lot of my inspiration for wandering, when I'm wandering, actually making any picture, there's always some reading that I've done that lives inside of me and just is part of those pictures I'm making. So Rachel Carson, who was a scientist, amazing, warned us about climate change years ago, if only we'd listened more to her. And I've mentioned Virginia Woolf. And so these voices are in my head when I'm wandering. So it felt natural that they should be embedded in the book as well. But I also think of books, the reason I love books so much is because they can house so much more of the things I think about. I can put into the book that might not be so obvious on a print on a wall. So I could collaborate with my friend Jem Southam, who would make a contribution. And I have texts in there I have a cousin who's the captain of a tall ship, who's lived his life at sea. So he did a small piece about a lost word called kumatage, which means the shimmer of light on the water, which is a lot in my pictures, the moon or the sun, how it shimmers on the water. So who knew there was a word about kumatage? So he wrote about, and he's trying to get that word in the OED. We'll see if that happens. So I just like that collaborative nature of working with other artists and thinkers about the sea. And the Rijksmuseum has this amazing public domain digital archive of so much stuff that I love to look at. So there's in the book in the back you'll see, I don't know if they have a picture of it or not, but like a cabinet of curiosities that I made of all these images of the sea, from natural history drawings of sea monsters to seashells, et cetera. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of things that I think about and look at. I had to throw in a few family photographs in there too. Yeah. But
I was really interested in that appendix that you just referred to, that where you have, it kind of seems to catalog all of the different ways that we relate to the sea. So scientifically, as a kind of source of inspiration, the objects relating to maybe the shoreline and kind of coastal life. So do you think of that as a kind of compendium of your inspirations in relation to the sea?
Definitely. I'm actually, probably in another life would have been a scientist because I'm interested in the science aspects of things too. And I just think science and art is kind of more similar than we give it credit. And I learn a lot from my scientist friends on the way they observe the world. And so I like to bring that into my own observations of the world. But more, my quiet wanderings on the beach is more a meditative thing. And I really can't leave the beach without something in my pockets. It's kind of hard, like a rock, it's simple like a rock, or maybe an interesting piece of seaweed. Right. Anna Atkins started that. So I guess, so it's all that stuff that's in my head when I'm wandering. But mostly I'm with camera and I'm just looking at stuff. And usually I find that if I've been looking at something for a long time, my camera soon follows. So it's just a natural thing. Years of walking along beaches, so the camera had to be part of that.
And in terms of your photographs, I think one of the things that becomes clear over the course of the book is that there isn't one sea in these pictures. So, there is the calm, contemplative sea, the beautiful sea, but there's also images that, you know, that show a kind of more brutal or powerful, dangerous, you know, kind of version of the sea.
Yeah.
And at least to, you know, I'm not American, but to my eyes, there's little that tells us about a specific place. It's
True.
more
That's
almost
true.
an idea of the sea that
Right.
we're looking at. But how much were you consciously trying to show the sea in these multiple states rather than in a single way?
Yeah, no, I think that's conscious. I want to show the variety of that. But it's just because when I'm at the beach, you don't know what the weather's going to be ahead of time. So you just go and you deal with what you have in front of you. So I'm glad there's a variety of, I don't just go to the beach on a warm, sunny July. I stay away in July, actually, too many people. But I did want to comment on that also, because I know Rob spoke about it earlier, that about how he doesn't talk about geographic boundary or political boundaries. And I too sort of want to stay away from like a specific location. It really is the sea. I don't need it to be, I'm not trying to do a photographic project of Newcomb Hollow Beach in Wellfleet, for example, although a lot of them are there. But it's really about, it's this greater thing called the sea and how that lives in our minds.
Right.
And how it can live differently in people's minds. I do want to emphasize again that I can't enter into all the aspects of the sea because there's so many people, you know, lives are put in danger when they have to flee, and their only way to flee is going out to sea, and that, you know, is not my experience. And so there's so much more of the sea that I don't have in this book, so I want to acknowledge that.
It's a personal, a very personal vision of what that means.
And a luxurious perspective,
I mean, another thing that I wanted to mention is that this is the third chapter in a trilogy of
so to speak,
books.
Yes.
The Meadow, which was published in 2015, and The Heavens in 2018. So could you say something about the kind of the way these projects relate to each other?
Yeah, so the way I photograph is not really, I don't think of myself as photographing on a topic. So, but for the last 30, 40 years, I've been photographing all these things. And at one point, I just felt like putting the meadow together, and that was just 20 years of pictures. But when I'm making the meadow pictures, I was also making pictures at night, which are the heavens, which I'm also making pictures of the sea. So all these things are happening sort of all together. It's not like I made the meadow in one decade and then the next one and the next one. It's just all these pictures. And at some point, I guess you get to a point in your life where you think you've got to, I don't know, shape it somehow.
Right.
So then they shaped up in these 3 separate categories.
Okay. Do we have a question for Barbara in the audience?
What's next?
The weather.
The question was, what's next? And the answer is the weather.
The weather.
Okay, that was short and sweet. Any
That'll
other
be
questions?
That'll be another 20 or 30 year project, though.
Okay, I have a question for you, something that you touched on. It's COP27 right now. And I mean, I gather that you are, you know, that the issue of the climate crisis and environmental issues is something that's important to you. I'm just curious to know what you think art's role is in relation to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very important, whatever information we can disseminate on that. And I think hopefully that what I bring to the table is sort of, look what can be lost. I mean, the ocean is so beautiful and the shoreline is amazing, but yes, this can all be lost in if we don't wake up to Rachel Carson, who told us this in the 50s, that we're heading on the bad path here.
Absolutely.
So believe science. Listen to Rachel Carson.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Yes, good.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you, everybody.